Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Beards and Cars. This is a podcast style series where we talk about stuff which could be related to a countdown or something which could be improved about a certain game like Gran Turismo Sport or Forza or whatever the case may be. And of course last week in this same series I broke down what I think it was 10 picks officially, but it was more like 11 or 12 of tracks which I think should return to the Gran Turismo franchise. And of course, in that series, as the name suggested, that was all circuits which we have had before. City circuits, both fictional ones, we had real ones as well, real traditional circuits, fictional ones, and of course a number of the suggestions down in the comments were also real-world circuits that haven't been featured in the game. And that is the purpose of this breakdown. This is my breakdown of the 10 real circuits, so none of these, of course, are fictional, but they've also never been featured in the Gran Turismo franchise. All of these would be brand new to the series, and I think would be really cool. Now I'm going to kick it off first of all with two honourable mentions. These are two tracks which I think either won't get added in the case of one of them, or I personally don't want added that much, because of course this is a personal list, and as always I would encourage you to slap down your list down below, get involved in the discussion, in the conversation, because of course there are, I believe, hundreds, you could easily say, of racetracks in the world. There must be hundreds, I don't know anywhere near all of them. And, of course, there are some great ones that won't be on the list. That's the nature of a top 10. So, initially, my two honourable mentions are, first of all, Catalunya. Now, Catalunya is featured on Forza. This footage of me driving in my Mosler, of course, is from that game. And it's from Forza 4, actually, in particular. This is an honourable mention for me because I know a lot of people do love Catalunya, but of course, as I said, this is a very personal list, and I never liked Catalunya that much. I can see why people do, but there's just something about the track that I never fully got on with. It's a semi-high-speed track. There are certainly a couple of very high-speed sections, the home straight in particular, and there are plenty of technical corners. You've got a couple of hairpins, a couple of square sections, but I don't know, I just find Catalunya to be a little bit dull in a weird kind of way. It is a highly competitive track though, it's great for close combat racing, especially with LMP cars, so of course it's worthy of an honourable mention. The second one is one which I would love to see featured in Gran Turismo, but I think the chances of it are probably the worst of this entire video. I think there's next to no chance that this track will come, because for one thing, how would you even accurately map it into the game? You'd have to do an approximation, because most of the track, as far as I can recall, doesn't exist anymore. There are just certain sections, and that is one of the most iconic, classic, or even vintage British circuits, which is Brooklands Raceway. This is a very high-speed circuit from in the real old Grand Prix days. It's a notoriously dangerous track, very high speed, it's a banked circuit. One of the corners, in fact a number of the corners technically, look a lot like the banked Monza circuit which you can use in photo mode on GT Sport. The corners look very much so like that, and a little bit like Nardo as well. And of course Nardo will be featured again on this list. And as I posted at the start of the video, if you'd like to jump around between the different tracks that I'm going to break down, you can see the time codes for all of those in the description. But that's it for my honourable mentions. I don't think either of those have a strong chance. I don't particularly care for Catalunya, but a lot of people do. Brooklands, I don't think that's going to happen. As far as the rest of these, well, probably quite a few of them won't happen, but that's not really the point. It's what I'd like to happen. So, let's get into the full list of 10 itself. First of all, I'm kicking off with one of my favourite tracks from Forza, Sebring. Now, Sebring is a great circuit for a combination of full-on racing from the race car point of view with prototypes, GT1s, GT3s, even NASCARs if you wanted to, but it's also a great track for road cars. As of course you can see from this footage from Forza 2, it's a circuit which has an undulating road surface on part of the track, which gives it a very interesting look and feel. The cars kind of bounce around quite a bit. And the track has a great mix of technical corners, some square corners even, but some really high-speed straights as well. It's a great track for endurance racing. You can spend hours on this track quite easily, and although the track doesn't take a huge amount of time to complete, it actually feels like a longer track than it is, and I think that's pretty cool. It's a track which, as I said, I've always loved on Forza. I would love to see it feature on Gran Turismo. As far as whether it would, I don't think the chances are great for Sebring, but it's a great circuit, so I would love it to. Next up, I'm putting a track which I don't think has much of a chance, but again, it's in the same kind of category as stuff like Brooklands, but especially the test course, Special Stage Route 7, and Special Stage Route X from last week, and that's Nardo. Now, Nardo is a track that I considered putting in last week, but I decided to save it for this week. And it's a great high-speed circuit. The visuals of the track are incredible. It basically looks like a massive circle with a couple of test track layouts within the circle. Of course, the Volkswagen W12 is named after this track. It set a speed record around the track. It's an excellent circuit for high-speed racing, but at the same time, it offers a considerably different challenge to something like, say, Route X or the test course, because those are much more traditional oval circuits where you've got two long straights and two curving corners. Whereas with Nardo, it's a little bit different because it's a constant corner, because the whole thing is a huge circle. So it'd be an interesting change, but certainly a great track for high-speed racing. Next up, I'm putting Valencia. Now, I said that none of these tracks are featured on Gran Turismo, but this is an interesting one because it has been featured on a polyphony game, but not Gran Turismo. Valencia di Riccardo Tormo, as it's sometimes called, was featured on Tourist Trophy, and it is much more of a MotoGP track than it is a car track. So I think it has a reasonable chance, but also it doesn't have a reasonable chance, if that makes sense. Because is it going to come back, or is it going to come to the game, I should say? Probably not, but the fact that Polyphony has used it before means that I would say there is a glimmer of hope. The fact that they used it in a bike game, though, makes it a little bit different. For those who haven't played Tourist Trophy, I really like this track. To give you some idea of what it's like, imagine something with the track layout that's a little bit like Monaco, but much flatter than Monaco, that kind of very tight technical circuit with lots of square section corners and hairpins, but also a great high-speed flow. But if you combine that with the visuals of something like, for instance, Complex String, so it's very flat, very open, a lot of greenery, very open environment without many trees or any trees, no coverings over the track. It's very wide open and sunny. It's great for MotoGP, it's great for cars as well, as far as I'm concerned. If you want to experience it, try and pick up Tourist Trophy, for instance. It gives you that true polyphony feel of what the track would be like. It's a pretty cool one, I think. I think there's a chance of it coming to the game, but being on the more bike side of things, maybe not. We'll see, because of course Kaz has discussed a Tourist Trophy 2, at least potentially, so who knows, it could come back in some other form. That would be very cool. Even if we got a Tourist Trophy 2, that would be cool, as far as I'm concerned, because I think the first one is still the best motorbike racing game ever. But of course, that's down to opinion. Next up, I'm putting Imola. Now this is one of those tracks which isn't featured on any of the car games that I own, any of the Gran Turismo or Forza games, and I don't think any car games that actually feature it. I do have Project Cars. I'm not sure if I've bought Project Cars 2, I can't recall. Assetto Corsa might have it, I can't remember, but I'd forgotten that I have actually driven on this track, but just not with a car, and that's probably why I'd forgotten, because I actually drove it, as you can see here in my review for the Ducati 998, in Ride. And I'd totally forgotten that it was that track. But I love this track. It's a really cool circuit. Now, again, like with Valencia, it was with a bike. So, of course, the physics and the visuals are a little bit different when you're riding around the track with the tilting horizon that a bike has than it would be with a car. But still, it's a great circuit, I think. You can see footage of Schumacher taking on this track in one of his Ferrari F1 years. It's a great circuit, it's high speed, it doesn't take too long to do a lap, but it's a lot of fun. You've got some corners which are really tight and very aggressive for overtaking, and then you've got some long, wide open straights for blasting past the opposition. I would love to see Imola come to the game. It really is a track, actually, that I forgot how much I like it. I would love to see Imola come to Gran Turismo. Next up, I'm putting another Forza fan favourite, but not one of my personal favourites, and that is Hockenheim. It would make a perfect addition alongside the Nordschleife, and Hockenheim is a much more compact and more technical approach than the Nordschleife is. The Nordschleife is one of my favourite tracks, but Hockenheim, not so much. I know that a lot of people love it. It's kind of like Catalunya for me. I get why people like it, but I never really enjoyed it that much. It's got some great straight sections, some very technical corners, and overtaking on this track can be surprisingly difficult sometimes. Even though the road is quite wide, it's very competitive. It really is a competitive track, and of course that's one of the reasons why it's been featured in F1 as well. So Hockenheim, I think, would be definitely a fan favourite if it were added to the game, especially for those players who've never actually driven on it, but love the Gran Turismo franchise, which in other words is most people. So unless you played Forza, you probably haven't driven on the track. It's a track which I think most people would like. I am pretty much the exception to the rule. I'm sure there are other people who don't, but most people seem to love Hockenheim. But for me, it's okay. I'd be happy to see it arrive on the game, but I probably wouldn't drive on it all that much. Next up, I'm putting an interesting circuit. This is one which I've never driven on in any of the games that I own. I know that it is featured on some games. I believe it's on Project Cars 2 or something like that. But it's Sepang. Of course, BMW named one of their colours after this track, Sepang Bronze, which is one of my favourite colours that they offer. And it's a gorgeous track. I mean, just look at the layout of this track. It looks fantastic. I love the, I would say, most iconic piece of the track, which is those two long straights capped off by the curving tight hairpin at the end, right in the centre of the track, with that huge white awning hanging out over the track, which looks fantastic. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Abu Dhabi, or those kind of circuits. It's got that very high-end, very exclusive kind of look to it. It looks like a very expensive circuit. It's got some really high-speed sections, some great sections for like formula racing, and of course it has been featured in F1 as well. It's a great track. It's not one which I've driven on, but having just seen it, I know that I would enjoy it. It looks similar enough to tracks that I like, such as Abu Dhabi, that I know I would enjoy it. Now, speaking of Abu Dhabi, or Yas Marina circuit, this is actually a track which I planned to include in the top 10, but while I was literally recording this just now and I mentioned it, I'd forgotten to include it. So although this is another top 10 video that isn't actually a top 10, I don't think too many people will mind, because Abu Dhabi circuit, for those who haven't driven on it, it's a gorgeous racetrack, and it's such a good one as well. Imagine if you haven't driven on, for instance, Forza 6 or 7 or whatever, which does feature it. It's kind of like a combination of Sepang, as I just said, which really doesn't help because most people haven't driven on that track either. But imagine something with the kind of vibe that Monaco has, like Côte d'Azur, in that kind of really high-end, expensive, exclusive kind of feel, where it's a great-looking location, a very modern approach to a racetrack, very modern art-esque, with these very wide runoff sections. So if you clip a corner, you don't necessarily end up on the grass, you just end up out of bounds. Which is an interesting approach to a racetrack, because if you think about it, there aren't that many tracks which have it that way. Most of them are surrounded by grass, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like Abu Dhabi so much, because it's different. It's a really different looking racetrack, and it's one which almost looks like it shouldn't be real, if you know what I mean. It looks like one of those fictional Forza tracks or a fictional Gran Turismo circuit. So the fact that it is real, I think is really cool. It's a very competitive track, some really high speed sections, again, plenty of square corners to take on some 90-degree turns, especially towards the end of the track. I love this track. And as you can see in this footage, you can even take a truck around there. So that's pretty fantastic as well. I completely forgot that I wanted to include it, so I definitely had to add that one in. Next up, I'm putting another track which I really love from the Forza franchise, Road America. Now this is a track which I know some of you guys want to be brought into the Gran Turismo franchise. I've featured this track on Forza reviews, I've featured it in ride reviews, I drove the Lightning LS218 motorbike on that track. This is a great circuit for high-speed racing. I would call Road America a perfect supercar track, because you can get cars so fast on this track. It's the perfect track for Ultimate Aeros, Venoms, Veyrons, Koenigsegg's. It's that kind of track. But despite the fact that Road America is one of the tracks that you can get the highest speeds on, it's deceptively challenging, because a lot of the corners, you really do have to scrub off a lot of speed, because if you try and take the corners too fast, you'll go straight off the track, especially in something like an Ultimate Aero that I'm driving here. Now, of course, a car like that doesn't fully apply in the Gran Turismo franchise, but still, I mean, GT3 racing on this track would be fantastic. It would be so competitive. Close quarters. Although the track is very high speed, a lot of the road actually isn't that wide, so overtaking can be more challenging than you think. But I love Road America. It's definitely one of my favourites of the Forza franchise. I'd love to see it featured. You can get some really great speed on this track. Next up, I'm keeping the American theme with another road circuit, Road Atlanta. Once again, featured on Forza, never featured, of course, on Gran Turismo. I, again, love this track. It's similar in some ways to Road America, and I don't just mean that it's American, but it's got a similar kind of high-speed vibe, and especially the first few corners on the track, those flowing left-to-right S-bends after the start-finish line, it's got a really nice flow to it, where you can actually go a lot faster than you think through those corners, clipping the curbs and getting a really nice flow in something like a Porsche 911 RSR or even an LMP machine. You've got a couple of long straights, one in particular with a nice square section hairpin at the top. It's a great track. You've got a couple of different layouts. There's a shorter one, which I'm not much of a fan of that. Whenever I can, I prefer to have the longer version of tracks, so you can get a really good meaty lap. It's perfect for endurance racing because part of the ALMS, I'm not sure if it still is, but at least it was featured in the American Le Mans series, and also I believe the Petit Le Mans as well. And for some reason I have this memory that Panos built the circuit. I think that might be wrong, because I tried to look that up recently and I don't think I could find evidence of that. But for some reason that's in my brain. So I don't know why I remember that way. Maybe did Panos have something to do with setting up the ALMS? Something like that. But I have some recollection of Panos being involved with Road Atlanta. So again, I mean, you guys know that I love Panos, so that ties in as well. For those who haven't driven on Road Atlanta, what would I liken that to? It's similar to Road America, but imagine a much more higher speed, or a much more high-speed version of Laguna Seca. It's got a little bit of that kind of vibe to it. Lots of runoff on corners, but instead of sand, you've got grass. I guess it's not really that much like Laguna Seca, but there's something about it which kind of reminds me of that. It's a very, I don't know, it's a very fun track. It feels very playful, like Laguna Seca does. It's challenging, but it's also a lot of fun. And it feels relatively compact, even though the track length is quite good. So I think in that way, it kind of reminds me of Laguna Seca. It's got that kind of vibe. It's also very sunny, which is a nice track as well. Next up, I'm putting another circuit which I've personally never driven on. A couple of you guys mentioned it. Zolder circuit. Now, I'd never seen footage on this track before. I immediately put two tracks together in my mind, because this circuit reminds me a lot of what would happen if you combined Spa with Monza. The shape, the size, the compact nature, and even specifically some of the corners, especially on the second half of the track, really do remind me of Monza. But then the opening straight with the high banked walls and the very tight layout and the grid style really reminds me of Spa as well. It really, to me, looks like a combination of those two, Monza and Spa put together. Relatively short lap. Looks like a lot of fun. I've never driven on it on any of the games that I've got. I believe, again, it's featured on like Project Cars 2 or something like that. But it is featured, I know, on some racing games. I've just never driven on it. Looks like a cool track, though, for sure. Next up, I'm putting a track which I didn't used to love, but it's actually really grown on me over the years. Again, it is featured on Forza. Very, very high-speed track. And I would say that this track, Mugello, which, as you can kind of tell, is an Italian circuit, would make a really good pairing with Road America. Because Road America and Mugello are very, very similar tracks in terms of the kind of driving style and the kind of vehicles that you can use. They've both got very distinctive, really long home straights, which are capped off by a sharp turn at the end. Even the shape of the track has some similarities, but the differences between the two are that I would say Road America has a little bit more of a challenging vibe to it, where the corners are a little bit tighter and sharper and more aggressive, whereas Mugello has a little bit more of a flow to it through the corners. There are some corners which look like 90 degrees, but they've actually got a bit more of a curve to it. It's a very, very good track for high-speed flow. It's great for supercars. It's great for like classic supercar racing with stuff like F40s and XJ220s. Not so much necessarily for prototype racing. I know that you could, of course, race them there if you want to, but to me, Mugello feels a little bit more like a Formula track. And of course I'm driving one here on it. So it's great for Formula racing, great for supercar racing. Of course you could drive other things here as well if you want to. But yeah, I'd love to see Mugello return. So ultimately ended up being like a top 13 list instead of top 10 once you factor in the honourable mentions. And also the fact that I completely forgot about Yas Marina. I don't know how I forgot because I love that circuit. So yeah, those are the 10 plus a couple of tracks that I would love to see feature in Gran Turismo. Overall, I don't think many of these have a strong chance. I think there are some which do. I think Yas Marina has a reasonable chance, but again, I don't know. Of all of them, I think the ones that have a decent chance are Valencia, because of the Tourist Trophy tie-in, potentially. I think Hockenheim has a reasonable chance. It would make a nice addition to stuff like Monza. I think Imola, maybe Imola. I don't know. I'd love to see Imola come back, but we'll have to see on that one. I think the Zolder circuit could happen, because of course we have Monza and we have Spa, or at least we had Spa. I know a lot of people want Spa to come back. I do really enjoy Spa, but the reason why it's not featured on this list is because of course it's not new. That would be a returning track. These are all brand new circuits, so that's why it's not here. But yeah, these are my picks. Of course, many of you guys I already know agree with these because you featured some of these, in fact, last week. So I'd love to hear down below what your top 10 would be, maybe a top 5 or even a top 15. But yeah, there are definitely tracks which I haven't featured, probably some which I've just forgotten about, maybe some that I don't even know about. And of course, it would always be nice to have tracks which are more cruise in nature, stuff like south of France kind of driving roads, or even something like the Stelvio Pass, which would be nice just to cruise or to enjoy supercars on. But I don't think stuff like that has much of a chance, to be honest, of coming to GT Sport because of how competitive and how focused and how FIA related, really, that game is. But we'll have to see. Overall, I would be really happy to see any of these come back, or, again, not come back, to feature, to make their debut in the franchise, and even something like Catalonia. Although I'm not a huge fan of it, or Hockenheim, it would still be very cool to have those tracks on the game. But that's it for my selections. Of course, stick around on the channel for more videos like this with top 10 breakdowns and various other discussions as to how Gran Turismo Sport could be improved, things which maybe are great about it, not so great, etc, etc. But that's it for this pick. I'll see you guys next week, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.